Well, folks, it's time for another card review, and we have what may be the craziest card in the history of Hearthstone. Kibler teased that this reveal he did was going to be the nuttiest card, and you know what? I don't think he oversold it. This is Kazaku-san, of course, the dragon version of Kazakis, and it's an 8-mana 8/8 dragon. Battlecry: if all minions in your deck are dragons, craft a custom deck of treasures. And the treasures this are referencing are the treasures from duels. And of course, I've played a ton of duels, so I'm beyond excited to have duels treasures in standard format. That is crazy. Now, I'm not going to be able to list all the treasures. Apparently, it's a bit of a selected pool. Not everything's going to be in there. But needless to say, there are some crazy treasures in duels. Apparently, Locust is available, for instance, which is hey, here's summon a board of 2/2s and deal 14 damage to the face if you want, right? We've got examples like Hyper Blaster, a 1/4 weapon with poisonous and immune while attacking, right? So just insane board clear. So there's Pure Cold, deal 8 damage to the opponent's face and freeze them for 5 mana. So just hyper efficient damage output, removal, crazy board clears, just anything that you want. Duels has a treasure basically to satisfy that. And needless to say, the average power level of Duels cards are notably higher than standard format cards. So once you play this, your deck is going to be full of incredibly strong bombs, assuming you meet this condition. So that condition said, if all minions in your deck are dragons, craft the custom deck of treasures. Now, that doesn't mean all cards in your deck have to be dragons. You can run spells on top of this, so it's actually not that hard to satisfy this. 5 dragons is technically enough as long as all of the minions in your deck are dragons. So a spell-based deck, just kind of tossing this at the end of the list and giving you this very defined win condition is sort of nuts. Now, the challenge here is this is 8 mana, so it's very late in the game, and it's going to take maybe a couple turns or a couple draws at least to start swinging things in your favor post treasures. So, not every meta is going to support this. Some will be much faster. You're going to have to really be able to keep alive or stall long enough or have enough health to play a sort of dead 8-drop that doesn't really do a lot immediately, right? It's just kind of sitting there, so you're kind of giving up a turn more or less because 8/8s these days just don't really do a lot. So you're going to need stabilization and recovery for this one to make sense. It's not just a freebie instant win the game. You also have to draw Kazaku-san, right? There's ways to cheat it out with Talon, make sure you hit it, but then Talon's not a dragon, so you've got a bit of a risk, right? So there are some real deck building challenges and some gameplay challenges. That said, of course, this seems like the most fun card in history. I don't even care if it's good. It has a chance to be good, I think, just because anybody that can stall long enough with freezes or life gain is going to have a win condition for sure. So I'm actually still going to say that this is a 5-star card probably, but it's just only a deck here and there actually going to be able to make it work successfully in a competitive environment. I think one will, for the record, but not many. But on top of that, who cares? It's ridiculously fun. It's amazing. It's an awesome card. I absolutely love it, and I want to play it yesterday. All right, moving on over here to the Stormwind Avenger for Paladin, a 3-mana 1/5. After you cast a spell on this minion, it gains +2 attack. So pretty interesting buff target here, of course. And you got this high health total to start with. So maybe you play this on 3, it sticks around, you buff it on 4, with maybe multiple buffs, Librams, even just a Blessing of Kings, some great 2 and 3 mana buffs for Paladin. And you start scaling up its attack pretty darn quickly, and very easily becomes 5, 7+ attack and becomes this really nice onboard threat if you're looking to go face. So I do think in a more aggressive variant of Paladin that's looking to create a lot of pressure and output, this card scales nicely because it's just awkward to deal with at that 5 health total. Your opponent's going to feel compelled to deal with it, right? Oh man, I got to take care of this before it becomes a problem. Might create some friction or inefficiencies for them. And then, if you are able to stick this in a Libram deck and play 8 Librams on it, you are suddenly looking at some absurd face damage. So I think it's an interesting threat. Now, of course, it's very specific. Any deck that's a little slower or cares a bit more about extracting maximum value or efficiency and less about raw, pure aggression isn't going to be able to use this one. So it could get stuck in that middle ground where there's not the right home for it. But if that aggressive spell or buff based Paladin deck gets out there, I do think this has a lot of potential. Another card here for Paladin is the Battle Vicar, a 2-mana 1/3 with Battle Cry, Discover a Holy Spell. So a little bit of a value generator on this one. Kind of reminds me lately of, say, like Pandaren Importer, 2-mana Discover a Thing. In this case, holy spells, can be a nice synergistic pool of things. There are still secrets and such that get in there and kind of mess with the average quality of the cards. But there are also some high rolls. You get some extra Librams, for instance, if you're a Libram deck, or just some big mid-game spells, some healing in a pinch on occasion. So that's nice. That said, does this card really do anything specific enough? When I compare it to something like Knight of Anointment, for instance, right? Anointment is like, man, I'm getting the card I want exactly from my deck. I'm doing it more efficiently because the body here is nothing to write home about. So is this effect going to be worth it? Are you going to care enough about value, or are you just going to want to create more efficient, more direct game plans? I think usually these days we like the more reliable and direct ideas as opposed to the kind of, well, I'm going to find an answer and discover a thing. That was indeed the Baron's meta. Those tend to succeed a little more in limited card pools, so maybe right after rotation, a card like this sneaks its way into a Paladin list that just needs to find more stuff to do. That said, I still think it'd be pretty low impact and, in fact, pretty unlikely. So I don't see the Battle Vicar making many waves. Moving on over to Rogue here, we got a new SI7 card, and I love to see it. And this is hilarious artwork, too. Like, he's dressed up as a whelp hanging out in the eggs, which is fantastic. The SI7 Smugglers, a 3-mana 1/3 battle cry, summon a random minion with cost equal to the amount of SI7 cards you've played this game. So, of course, we've seen Quest Rogue find some pretty reasonable success at various points now. It's been a very solid middle to higher tier deck, not like top of the meta, but consistent and good. And I think adding an extra option into that deck for even more quest consistency is nice. And this also has some really nice scaling into the late game, because once you've played 4, 5, 6 SI7 cards, suddenly this is a lot of stats and stuff on board for 3 mana. Now, when you play this more honestly on exactly 3 mana, and it's like, well, maybe I've only played 0 or 1 SI7 cards, you're not getting a lot right away out of this. Maybe you're getting a 1/3 and a 1/1, or a 1/3 and like a 2/2 average stat line very early in the game if you haven't had a successful start. You're not going to feel good about those moments, but you're probably not going to feel terrible either, because you're just advancing quest. And sometimes that's all you need. Just fill your mana, get some speed bumps down, and move quest along. And that's still going to feel okay, because a lot of SI7 cards fall off so hard in the late game that you're like, yeah, sure, I love playing this on 3, but on 7, 8, like if I haven't won off the back of quest completion, it's not a great kind of finisher piece. This at least moves with you throughout the course of the game, continues to get bigger. And sometimes maybe just dropping a big, random 7 drop is that final blow that sticks and actually ends the game on the back of your Battle Master finisher or whatever. So I do think this fits that game plan fairly well, and it's a pretty proven deck. So I think Smuggler has a really high chance of success. On the other side of things for Rogue here, we have Smokescreen, an 8-mana spell, which is insane. That's crazy. 8 mana, draw 5 cards. So mega sprint here, and trigger any death rattles that are drawn. So obviously put this in a deck with a bunch of big scary death rattles. If you manage to draw them all off Smokescreen, you could get like a big board or some crazy burst damage off some humongous owls. Whatever your game plan is, it's theoretically possible with Smokescreen. But a few major challenges here to overcome, right? Number one, it's 8 mana. That's very late in the game. These days, by 8 mana, a lot of decks are really refining their win condition, getting close to ending games, have like stabilized hard, have plenty of answers to any kind of board you might develop off Smokescreen. So since this doesn't feel as like a direct win condition, that's very, very expensive for a card these days. Especially Rogue is a class that doesn't tend to succeed best in the late game scenarios without a lot of defense or survival tools. On top of that, there's some consistency issues, because like, are you running all death rattles to make sure you hit death rattles off of this? Because if you hit 5 cards that aren't death rattles, you've spent 8 mana to not do much, and that can be tough. So, I think you need the right consistency of death battles to hit a few that are really big, and you might need them to be big defensive stuff too. So, those 5/8 taunt demons, for instance, might be good results off this, sure, but it still doesn't really feel like a big decisive game-winning play in many cases. So are there other ways to use this for card draw, like tickets or something? Summoning 3/3s, like I just don't know that this has got that swing potential. Are there ways to pay off big spells? Nothing's coming to mind really for Rogue. That's just leaving this in a really awkward spot for me. Sprint doesn't cut it these days when Secret Passage draws you 5 cards sort of for 1 mana. I just don't see how Spoke Screen holds up when most decks have, much faster, more immediate game plans than this can really support. All right, heading over to Shaman here with a Spirit Mount. Mount's coming back, 2 mana. Give him in +1/+2 and spell damage +1. So decent stat buff and some spell damage in a pinch on any minion laying around. That can be nice. You can also see the Raptor, of course, is going to have those stats. That dude looks familiar from Battlegrounds, right? So he's a 1/2 with spell damage. So basically a sticky kind of spell damage buff. Might be hard for your opponent to deal with these various levels of spell damage. And if you care about spell damage at all, this could be nice. So decks that have burst damage, for instance, any sort of spell damage synergies that might pop up, doubled spells can kind of scale even better off of this because it might also double essentially if you get like post-quest Brucon. So there are some interesting lines for this. And I like sticky stats like this too. Just awkward things to deal with can be just in its own right pretty nice. So I do see angles. That said, is this going to be focused enough essentially for decks to really care about it? Like if they care about burst damage, maybe it's more card draw or more burst damage spells, and cards like this sort of just don't make the cut, right? Like, yeah, it fits fine, but is it better than just running more damage or more draw that gets me to that win condition even faster? So I like a lot about this one. I think the fact that it's sticky and a buff is good. I think it's cool. It's probably not going to be like, a reliable high tier meta kind of card, just a solid option. All right, moving on over to Hunter here. It's the Furious Howl, not to be confused with the Ferocious Howl, but I think this spell's kind of nuts. I think this looks really strong. It's a 2 mana spell. It draws you a card and it repeats until you have at least 3 cards. So essentially, if this is the only card in your hand, you play it and you're going to get 3 cards drawn. If you have this and another card in hand and you play it, you're going to get 2 cards drawn, which would be the sort of ideal scenarios. Obviously, if you have a full hand, like 7 cards, not literally full, but a big hand, you can still just cycle this out for 2 mana. It does draw a card at a base level, right? So it's always kind of a cycle and a pinch for 2 mana if you just want to trade it in for something better. But those empty hand scenarios are where this really thrives. It's kind of got those divine favor vibes, just capped at 3 cards. But here's the thing, right? In a Face Hunter deck where you're just dumping your hand and pressuring people like crazy, which, Face Hunter is a very reliable deck archetype for Hunter. This is perfect because you're playing out all your stuff anyway. You don't care to save this till your hand is empty. Then you have 6-7 mana left in a turn. You rip this thing. Hey, there's 3 more burst damage cards, right? And you just keep going. And suddenly that gives you that final push, that final wave to end the game. It's kind of like a Voracious Reader style card, but cheaper and immediate, right? Voracious Reader was a pretty great card at 2 mana, but it was delayed. And yeah, it had a body, but not one that you really cared about. So I think the fact that this is both immediate and the same cost or cheaper than current cost Voracious Reader makes it fit that same mold, but just be way better at it. So I actually think this card is going to be very good in Face Hunter decks. In fact, maybe even frustratingly good from time to time where you think you've stabilized and it's like, no, they got the Howl and I'm dead, right? So keep an eye out on this one for sure. On top of that, for Hunter, we have the Dragonbane Shot, another 2 mana spell. This one deals 2 damage, can go face, note, and honorable kill, add a Dragonbane Shot to your hand. So this is intriguing, right? Basically an infinitely looping resource if you want, which of course Quest Hunter comes to mind for that. Just use this to ping off a minion. If it's got 2 health, you get that honorable kill and you get 1 back in hand. So maybe multiple quest triggers in a single card. On top of that, I think this offers just like some generally interesting utility. Your opponent plays a Trog or whatever 2 health minion, and you kind of want this to go face because you're a hunter, but I got 2 mana, not much else to do anyway. I might as well just clear this minion and I'll get this Dragonbane Shot back in hand. so that I have that resource to go face later if I want, or just clear whatever next thing they have. Now, we know Honorable Kill is really unreliable. It's often hard to get Honorable Kill procs. So will this be worth it at a base level if the Honorable Kill doesn't line up? That's where it starts to look a little iffier, right? 2 damage for 2 isn't exactly exciting these days anymore. Usually that's bundled with a more guaranteed upside like Ignite or Runed Orb come to mind for Mage, right? Like, you know you're getting something out of that. Whereas this one, it's kind of iffy and it might just whiff. So that could be what holds this card back. But if Quest Hunter comes to prominence, this seems good enough to me. Like, I think that fact that you can get extra quest procs out of it is really nice. And that gives this card a real shot. Moving over to Warrior, we've got Hit It Very Hard. It's a 1 mana spell, gain +10 attack and can't attack heroes this turn. So crazy attack here. And, you know, when we first looked at this, everybody's like, oh, Silas OTK. You know, you can Silas and Ash Tongue and play 2 of these and hit them for 20. So it's like a 20 damage burst combo. But of course, that's kind of just worse than the Shield Slam version that's already played and has succeeded, for the record. That's been a viable plan. So I don't think having to have 2 of these and having a lower cap is going to be worth it. Like, yes, it's technically more reliable because you don't have to have armor, but that hasn't really held that deck back in the past. So I think you have to look at this card a little more honestly and a little more straight up. And what use case does it have there? Well, it's basically really efficient removal, kind of in the vein of Shield Slam, but one that doesn't demand that you have armor. So if your opponent plays an early 8/8, you know, whatever, Flesh Giant back in the day, and you don't have the armor to Shield Slam a Flesh Giant, well, you can still use Hit It Very Hard to clear that Flesh Giant. The problem, of course, is that you're going to be taking a lot of damage in return. So it doesn't really feel all that good. It's much more kind of in a pinch problem solving as opposed to ideal or efficient problem solving. That said, you know, I think in some ways the +10 attack here feels like a bait. You don't have to kill a 10/10 to make this interesting, right? Sometimes just killing a 3/3 or something or 4/4 in the mid game is more than enough return on this investment. And then suddenly you're like, okay, yeah, that was worth it. And then if there are any sort of attack synergy cards that pop up where, you know, something that scales with attack, this has some potential there as well to just fuel that synergy. You might be thinking about Steel Dancer specifically, but that does reference the weapons attack, not your hero's attack. So I don't believe this would scale up Steel Dancers to like automatically summon a 10-drop, right? So that's not the option, but there could be things in the future that are printed that do support this. Also for Warrior here, we have Shoulder Check, a 1 mana tradable spell. Give a minion +2/+1 and Rush. And when it comes to tradable cards, I just like can't write them off. Tradable is such a notable upside for cards that I always think they have a chance. It's like, well, yeah, tradable, you know, it's kind of free to run in some cases. Like Warrior is also a class that often has spare mana floating around in slower, more reactive decks. So it's like, yeah, I mean, sure, it makes sense. And then as far as the effect is concerned, it's a pretty nice buff. Like just as is, like if you're playing in an aggressive deck, particularly, like sometimes that +2 attack is just, that's good for 1 mana, like getting 2 extra damage from something stuck on board. And then, you know, the reactive aspect from the Rush here can be relevant to some decks too. You play a minion, you want to make sure you get a good efficient clear, play whatever Battlecry thing that gives you armor or something, and then also use it to clear a minion. That's not necessarily bad when you have that backup plan of tradable to make sure that you can still get some resources out of this if needed on demand. So I don't think this is like a home run. It's not like crazy. I don't look at this and go, oh my God, it's broken, but it's a simple tradable card and that always has a chance. Oh shoot, I missed a card for Shaman here. Bracing Cold, a 2 mana spell. It's cold. It's a frost spell, of course, and it restores 5 health to your hero, and it reduces the cost of a random spell in your hand by 2. So this is interesting. I feel like this is support for like a more control, slower kind of Frost Shaman deck. And we've seen other cards like that too, like Snowball Fight. They don't really get played in the Frost Shaman decks right now that are a bit more aggressively minded and focused, even mid-rangey, right? But this wants you to go slow. And I don't hate it in that regard. Like it's just a little in a pinch heal where you kind of invest this mana into a future turn. Sometimes in a control deck, you're just looking to fill those early mana turns until you can do bigger, crazier things later. So this discounting some big spell in hand, cheating that out a turn sooner, might make a big difference. And, you know, 2 for 5 is not the most efficient, but it's really almost like 0 mana for 5 as long as you're planning to spend that mana later, and often you would. So there might even be some like crazy combos for this too, where you like isolate some broken card in hand and cheat it out a turn early. I don't know about that. That seems much harder to do. Straight up, this feels more like what I described initially. Now that said, I still don't think this is that strong. Like none of these numbers feel all that pushed or all that useful. And I don't see a reason to really play that kind of control Frost Shaman compared to all the cards we got right now that are much better at creating threats and creating boards that actually swarm and kill your opponent, whether that's the big Snowfall guys or, Barren Glacier building those big wide boards, Wildpaw Cavern, right? All of these things kind of support that plan more. So I don't really see this getting over the hump from a deck building archetype fit problem standpoint. Oh my god, I missed a Hunter card too, so we're just bouncing around. This is the Pet Collector, a 5 mana 3/3 for Hunter. Battlecry, summon a beast from your deck that costs 5 or less. So basically, this is like a 3/3 for free that finds you whatever thing you really like, whatever 5 mana beast it is. Maybe it's a Trampling Rhino because you're an aggressive deck and you want to hit people with your Trampling Rhino. This is basically a way to guarantee, or more likely guarantee, that you find it, so you can both draw Trampling Rhinos and you can now draw Pet Collectors, and they both satisfy the same thing of getting your Trampling Rhino into play, or a Moonfang, or whatever cool beast you care about. Could be even less mana than that as well. But with that comes a sort of deck building restriction where you can't run cheaper beasts if you want to make sure you find the right one or the maximum sized ones. Because of course, summoning a 1 mana beast off this, getting a Wolpertinger would feel really, really bad. So you have this kind of restriction. You have to make sure your deck can be built in a way to support this. When it does, I think this is kind of a free 5/5 that tutors the thing that you like, or excuse me, 3/3 that tutors the thing that you like. And that seems free and fine. Like I think decks will want that if they're able to beat that condition. It seems like a nice little bonus. Not crazy, but free and fine. But how many decks are going to be able to do that? Very few, I suspect. Most decks are going to want to have other options, not be limited to, this exact sort of line. And then there is that risk too, where you get all these 5 mana cards stuck in hand. That could also shut down a lot of decks as well. So this is like, maybe there's that one deck where this works great and it's perfect, and that's a moderate to high tier deck. But outside of that, this isn't a card that gets played across the board. So solid option once again. Moving over to Druid, you might have seen a different version of this card. The one that was revealed was wrong. This is correct. Small distinction. It's a 4 mana 3/4 Raid Negotiator. Battlecry, discover a choose one card. It has both effects combined. So only the card that you discover here has the effects combined. The initial reveal suggested that the next choose one card you play would have both effects combined. This is limited to the one that is discovered. And of course, that lowers the utility of this a lot, because you can't set up some crazy awesome choose one card of your choice to pay off the Raid Negotiator. Instead, you're limited to the pool of choose one cards that you get offered in the Discover, which might give you a crazy awesome one, but also might give you 3 that aren't particularly relevant to the current game state, or just aren't that high output in general, because there are some lower cost choose one cards. So that said, this is still just 4 mana discover a thing. It's a slightly more powerful thing than average. That's fine, but I think a lot of mid-cost cards like this tend to get lost in the shuffle for Druid. They like low-cost things and high-cost things because they can ramp like crazy into the high-cost things. Low-cost things help them fill in the gaps or draw cards for the high-cost things later. And I don't know if a card like this is going to help you achieve either of those goals. In a Guff world, there could be somewhere where just like generating resources and making things helps you fill your mana. But so far, Guff decks have had more refined late game plans and win conditions they're trying to achieve, as opposed to sort of buying time, which is what it feels like a card like this is doing instead, right? Just finding random stuff isn't usually that directed. So for me, yeah, it's okay. It does something cool, but it tends to be the kind of card Druid just loses sight of when it comes to deck building. And then next up here, we have the Boomkin, a 5 mana 4/5 for Druid. And it's got to choose one option here: restore 8 health to your hero or deal 4 damage. And any card that can go face, I always like take a closer look at, because ending games is good in Hearthstone, and there might be some shenanigans here. We can use this to just be that finishing blow. That's nice. And then, you know, if you get both of these choose one effects, like we just saw with that other card that enables, hey, that's a big swing, right? Like heal yourself up and clear a minion or do some face damage. That's cool. But once again, this is that kind of middle mana spot where sometimes Druid just doesn't seem to thrive particularly well playing kind of one thing down. In a way, this card feels a bit honest. We've seen, like, you know, Fire Elementals make sense, and this has that flexibility or backup plan to kind of pivot depending on the game state. So again, I wouldn't write it out. It does a lot. The numbers are pretty solid for its cost. It feels like one of those cards that's like perfect for arena formats, right? Those kind of things where it's just honest minions on board. For standard, Druid tends to be a little bit more cheaty. They tend to do things that feel more broken, whereas this feels a little too honest. So that has some major concerns for standard format. All right, next up here for Warlock is the Infestation, a 6 mana Fel spell. Always like Fel spells. It's fun to try to build Fel decks. This one summons a 3/3 Dread Imp to attack each enemy minion. So it's kind of like an Unleash the Imps, I guess, or maybe like an Imp Mirror. There are a few different comparisons here you can take. But I worry about this one. So, you know, ideal scenario is your opponent has a board full of treants, right? A bunch of 2/2s, you play this, you perfectly clear the 2/2s, and you're left behind with a bunch of 3/1s, creating a sort of counter threat. That's perfect. But what happens if your opponent has a board full of 3/4s suddenly, right? It's like, oh, crap. Or even just a few 3/4s, right? Like, ah, crap. These don't feel as good, right? It's much, much harder to make this feel good. So it's very board state dependent. And the thing about like Soul Mirror, for instance, the reason that worked so well is because Soul Mirror scales with your opponent's board. No matter how big their board is, Soul Mirror is going to go toe-to-toe with it. And it won't always be favorable to certain value trades and stuff, but it's going to do a better job of keeping up. If your opponent has 5/5s on board, 4/4s on board, 8/8s on board, in all those cases, Infestation just doesn't keep up. And then it's also just stuck dead in hand if your opponent doesn't have enemy minions, right? You're just not doing anything. It's just sitting there useless, right? So it's not like this has some sort of board building utility. So I don't know. It feels like it's really limited to me where it's only going to line up against like perfect sorts of board states. And that's going to make it really, really hard for a card like this to see consistent play. So it can't be threat inducing. It's really only reactive. That's maybe a challenge in itself sometimes, right? Warlock sometimes wants stuff on board to be threatening. But beyond that, it's just expensive, very situational removal. Moving on to Demon Hunter here, we have the Wings of Hate, a 1 mana spell. It summons 2 1/1 Fel Wings, and then it upgrades at 5 and 10 mana. It summons 3 and 4 Fel Wings on its upgraded versions. I sure thought it would go to 4 and 6. That didn't feel totally broken to me. But you know, more support for token Demon Hunters, wide board Demon Hunter stuff. We've seen certainly a lot of these cards, none of which have really succeeded a ton. We've seen some teases with expendable performers and Kurtrus and stuff, but the whole package never really totally came together. I should also probably focus on this card as we're talking about this one. This allows you to deal 1 damage to all minions and you gain attack if you honorably kill them. So there are some worlds where you summon wide boards and then gain a bunch of attack as like a combo. But I don't know, it feels kind of awkward. It feels like you're sitting on this a while. I still am not actually convinced there are going to be enough token Demon Hunter support pieces to come together. And this doesn't even really feel like one of the most compelling versions of token Demon Hunter cards because it doesn't have rush, so it can't be used like outside of that very well. It's just kind of summoning a lame duck board. And it doesn't scale especially well either, right? Like, yeah, okay, I get 1 extra after waiting 4 turns or top decking this late in the game. It's not like it's, you know, creating some crazy threat later. And then 4 total doesn't even give you that much like damage output off the Keen Reflex we're going to talk about in a minute. So to me, it just feels a little too small. Like, just doesn't do enough numerically to make a lot of sense. So moving over to the Keen Reflex, this is a 2 mana spell. Deal 1 damage to all minions, honorable kill, gain 1 attack this turn. So obviously this can be used in combination with our previous card for some kind of like, you know, summon your own stuff and damage, destroy it all and get like a damage output for some combos, which is kind of neat. We talked about Mad Summoner on stream in wild format. You know, it could be like a 13 damage combo. That's pretty fun. But ultimately, like, it's still awkward. Now, that said, of course, there are scenarios where this is just a reasonably good board clear. Anytime you like scale this up with spell damage, Moargs, whatever, right? it becomes a useful tool that might just give you some extra damage here and there, and that's kind of a bonus to a card you were happy to play as a board clear anyway. So I think this does do its own thing, and then very occasionally when they do summon that board of 1/1s, you're just going to blow them up, and it's going to be amazing, right? So there is utility there. I like this more so than our previous card. I still don't know that it's, you know, the fuel or the payoff for a token Demon Hunter deck, but a more generally useful card. We also have here the Razorglaive Sentinel, a 4-mana 5/4. After you play the left or rightmost card in your hand, draw a card. So this is kind of like a Stargazer Luna for Mage back in the day, but you can play from either side of your hand in natural outcast fashion. And that's intriguing. Like, this is 4 mana. That's a heavy tax to pay for a card draw engine compared to, say, like Stargazer Luna. But it's also a lot cheaper than, say, like, you know, Gadgets and Auctioneer, or we saw that like Chandler and Mage, the fire spell guy. It is cheaper than those. On top of that, there is Quest Demon Hunter, which discounts cards in your deck, right? So you can have a lot of really low cost stuff in your deck, drop this down, and then just rip through your deck. Whether that's Outcast upside or not, who cares? You might just be able to do some crazy things. Even like OTK Demon Hunter might be able to use this as some success. I don't play the deck a lot. Maybe too expensive, but it kind of makes sense as an engine to finish out the game. But beyond that, they're still drawing a lot of cards, and having these crazy engines can get broken. So this is one of those cards. I don't see the immediate line for it, but it sure feels like it might be busted someday. So I'm absolutely going to keep an eye out for it. Oh my god, and then it's my Warlock card. I forgot. I love this card. I just missed it somehow, despite it being my favorite card of the reveal so far. It's Curse of Agony, a 1-mana shadow spell for a Warlock. It shuffles 3 Agonies into the opponent's deck. They deal fatigue damage when drawn. So basically, you're shuffling a fatigue draw in that deals 1, and then 2, and then 3. It's going to scale up with fatigue. And then the next round, because this isn't a legendary, are going to deal 4, and then 5, and then 6, which I think is like 23 damage, 21 damage. What did I say? 6 and 5 is 11, and 4 is 15, and then it was 6 for the first round. 21 damage total off of just 2 Curse of Agony. So you can really punish decks that tend to draw through a lot of cards. You're not always going to get to 21. They may not get to the bottom of their deck, but if they draw a lot, this is a punish to drawing a ton of cards, which I love in this kind of combo meta, being able to shut down people who draw cards. Of course, there's also potential for things like Ticketus emptying their deck and then shuffling these in so that they draw them all immediately. And then any additional fatigue draws are going to be extra damage because you've ticked up their fatigue so far. So will this be like a hated card? Maybe. Could be really frustrating. I don't know yet. But will it answer combo metas? Maybe. That's kind of exciting to think that we could punish card draw in a way. So Curse of Agony feels like it has a lot of potential to be very, very strong in my mind. And there you go. That wraps it up for this card review of Onyxia's Lair. Some pretty crazy stuff indeed. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned this weekend for more card reviews. Sounds like we have reveals coming the next 2 days, so I'll try to get videos out. That said, thanks as always for watching, and until next time, game on.